knowing where to focus your efforts when managing an SEO campaign can be challenging, especially when you're working with a restricted budget. But I wanted to share something with you real quick today. This is a question that one of the members asked in the community, and he's asking, and this actually ties in with trying to rank for a particular term given the client's site, in this case, has low domain authority. Now, if you know anything about me and the message that I promote around SEO, I don't necessarily like to focus too much around vanity metrics, domain authority, rankings, and of course, but I think in this case, I need to at least give some context around the question. Now, you shouldn't spend too much time fussing about and worrying about domain authority, although, and this is again, this touches back on, wasting time in tools like Majestic and Ahrefs and SEMrush and looking at numbers and getting lost in spreadsheets. I don't think that's a good use of your time. However, having said that, there are metrics that you need to pay attention to, especially at the very beginning of a campaign. And I'll start by answering this question with the following point. For new campaigns, you should always be taking note of the domain authority of the client's site. Because let's say that you pick up a client, they've just started a new business, their website's 6 months old, they've got a domain authority of 1, and they're wanting to compete in a very high or highly competitive marketplace. And they might be facing off against other competitors that have a domain authority of 30, 40, 50, and perhaps even higher. That's going to be incredibly difficult to get results for the client, given that there's such a large gap between the clients, where the client currently is, and their competitors. So this is definitely something you should be at least taking a quick look at before you bring on new clients. I think that's one area that's probably overlooked quite often. I know for most SEO consultants, they'll do the gap analysis, right? They look at the amount of search traffic and they'll look at keywords and so forth, and they'll, as part of that gap analysis, they might put a proposal together or, pitch for a presentation, which is what I teach in the training. But I think the DA of a client's site is often overlooked. If you pick up a client's site and they've got a really low domain authority, and you're going to be competing against sites that have established sites that have a high domain authority, then that's going to be very difficult. And worst case scenario is that you just can't get the results you're looking for, especially if the budget is limited. Now, having made those points, I'll share the question with you, and this is coming from Ben in the community. He's asking, how can I compete for a competitive keyword to move the needle for my money term I'm trying to rank for, given that the competitors in this case have a domain authority between 20 and 30, and in this case, the client site is domain DA6. And he's asking, okay, do I continue with off-page and links, or do I focus on building out blog post content? Now, he's asking that question for a reason because, and in fact, I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to share with you my response. Actually, I'll just read this because I think I make a good point here, and I'll explain to you why I make this point and why you as an SEO consultant should be mindful of this when making decisions, as you navigate your way through an SEO campaign. So I start by saying your actions and the focus of the campaign should align with what the client is wanting to achieve. Okay, I'll come back to that point in just a second. This, of course, ties in with budget allocation. So if you have $1,250 to play with each month, that being 50% of, say, $2,500, so you're working at, let's say, 50% profit margin. So the client's paying $2,500, you split it down the middle, you keep 50%, you got $1,250. And the client desperately wants to sell more blue widgets, then you'll have to decide what action to take and how best to allocate those funds. Okay? Number one, publish a shitload of long-form blog content that has the potential to rank quickly for blue widgets. That's your first option. Or 2, stop publishing on-page content completely and go all in on off-page in an effort to target that for the head term blue widgets. Right? Obviously, there's a trade-off. Blog posts, right? There's a short-term advantage because you can publish lots of blog posts, and they can bring in. They'll get results faster. They all need to work collectively, and they'll probably bring in fewer conversions overall. Now, for the head term, right? This, of course, if you go all in on off-page and you just aim for ranking that head term. The head term, you'll have a long-term advantage. The long-term advantage, rather, is a single dedicated page bringing in more conversions but taking much longer. So there's a trade-off, okay? Publish a lot of blog post content focused in and around that term, along with long-tail variations and so on, or going all in and focusing on that head term and focusing on off-page, which, of course, takes longer. So at this point, you'll need to make a decision, right? Now, there's a couple of things here that I'll touch on. I'll come back to real quick. The first one being my point around the alignment of the campaign. So the focus of the campaign should align with what the client is wanting to achieve. This is something that I'm not quite sure most SEO consultants are taking into consideration when they're working on client campaigns. In fact, this is something that I teach, and it's a conversation that needs to happen at the very beginning of a campaign. And this is when you have your initial strategy session, right? You have your initial strategy session and you provide the client with a client questionnaire where they fill out, where they answer a series of questions in order for you to get a better understanding of their overall goals, objectives, and everything else. But in and amongst those questions, you should be asking the question, where do you want us to focus our efforts? And a better way of putting it is, where is the money in this for you? Right? So, and this is a question I've asked plenty of clients, and all of them have said, wow, no one's ever actually asked us that before. They really appreciate the fact that I'm taking the time to ask the question. Now, this might seem pretty obvious, but again, a lot of SEO consultants miss this point, and even large-scale agencies too, right? They'll just start working on a campaign and they'll start blasting the homepage with links and publishing content and doing all of this work with no real understanding of what it is that the client's wanting to achieve or what they're wanting to focus their efforts on. And I think when it comes to focusing your efforts, that question there is really important, because the focus, where they want to focus their efforts, may change throughout the duration of the campaign lifecycle, right? So at the very beginning, they might say, hey, if we can get more of these types of customers and sell this type of product, that would be great. And of course, once you've achieved that, then there might be something equal to that they would like to achieve also. And there may be 2, 3, 4, 5, or even half a dozen different goals and objectives that they'd like to potentially achieve during that campaign. So when you take the time out to actually ask the client what it is that they're wanting to focus on, this will help. This does a number of things. It helps give the client confidence in knowing that you're focusing your efforts in the right area. Money and time isn't being wasted. But it also gives you direction, right, in terms of the actual campaign itself. So without going too far off topic, I think it's incredibly important that you figure out at the very beginning what or where you need to focus your efforts. And then from there, once you know where you should focus your efforts, then you need to make the decision as to where best to allocate your time and the campaign, or where best to also allocate campaign budget. Now, before I wrap this up, I just want to say real quick, I'll give you an example of this because I think it's important that you understand my point, right? Let's say you pick up a plumber and you start working with a plumber and you're charging them, I don't know, $3,500 a month. And you start doing all of this work and you say you go through the first month's worth of work, and then you jump on end of month strategy call with a client. You say, okay, Bob, this month we did this, and that's the work that's been completed. Now, the last thing you want to have happen is for the client to say, well, hang on a minute, why did you spend all of that time trying to rank us for leaky taps? We're not interested in those sorts of jobs. Those jobs are worth like $30 for us. We're really not interested in driving 2 hours to the other side of Sydney for a $30 job. It's the commercial kitchen fit outs that we want, because that stuff is worth $10,000 or $15,000 for us. So that right there is an example of why it's important to at least ask the question at the very beginning of a campaign to understand exactly where the client wants to focus, wants you as a service provider to focus your efforts. And once you know that, then you'll be able to make the decision, given the amount of budget or allocated funds, how best to allocate those funds, and of course, how best to allocate the time.